Thank you, everybody, for joining today's session on building influence within your personal and professional life. We will go ahead and get started momentarily, but before we dive into the content, I just wanted to say a big thank you to Darnell for moderating this conversation. It was great collaborating with you on this event, and I hope we have more chances to work alongside one another moving forward. To provide a quick overview of my background for those who I have not met, my name is Triston Francis and I attended Wharton where I majored in finance, legal studies, and business ethics. While in college, I spent summer internships within sales at Google, then private wealth management at Goldman Sachs, then investment banking at Morgan Stanley, where I joined full time after graduation. While at Morgan Stanley, I worked across a variety of divisions. I started by covering consumer retail companies within investment banking. Then I transitioned to sales and trading, where I covered our largest asset management accounts. After doing this for a few years, I joined an internal strategy role to help launch a team focused on increasing business with Asian, Black, and Hispanic clients. And after all of these experiences, I then moved into talent management and focused on internal mobility and specifically how to move our top performing analysts from one division to another. After Morgan Stanley, I went to Harvard Business School for my MBA. I had three primary goals during business school. First, I wanted to develop leadership skills. Second, I wanted to study organizational behavior. And third, I wanted to gain personal clarity on the type of work that I wanted to pursue with my life. There were two main experiences at Harvard that enabled me to develop as a leader. First, I served as the student body co-president of my class. In this role, my objective was to foster a cohesive, collaborative community on campus. I had the opportunity to lead an exceptional, diverse team of more than 70 classmates and manage a budget of more than 1.3 million. The second experience was serving as the education representative for my section. As context, each MBA class at Harvard is approximately 930 students, which is broken down into 10 groups of 93, which we refer to as a section. Every section elects one representative who serves as the liaison to their professors. These two roles allowed me to give back to my community while fueling my growth as a leader. In terms of classes, I focused largely on organizational behavior. My highlight was spending 1.5 years working with Professor Leslie Perlow, who serves as the head of research at Harvard Business School. Alongside a small group of MBA students, we co designed a course called Crafting Your Life, which launched in the fall of 2019 and has been taught to roughly 100 MBA students at Harvard thus far. This course aims to help students clarify their purpose and live with greater intentionality. While serving as a research associate, I completed approximately 120 alumni interviews. Each interview began with the same question: tell me about how your life unfolded after HBS, highlighting the major personal and professional transitions which you went through. What were the trade offs that you had to make, and how did you come to those decisions? In addition to informing the modules that would be taught during the Crafting Your Life course, these conversations provided me with tremendous personal and professional clarity around the impact that I aspire to have. The impact I want to have with my life can best be summarized through two core questions that I hope to spend as much time as possible thinking through during my career. The first core question is, how can companies create a culture where their employees are engaged and excited about their work on a daily basis? The second core question is, how can one best help another person reach their full potential? To address my core questions at an organizational level, the relevant topics where deep expertise will best enable me to have an impact are organizational design, human capital management, as well as diversity, equity, and inclusion. I joined consulting as a way to continue developing my expertise in these areas, and I felt that the Boston Consulting Group, and particularly our people and organization practice area, would be an ideal way for me to further explore and build experience within these topics. At an individual level, the relevant skills that will best enable me to help people reach their full potential include coaching, public speaking, and writing. Every few weeks, I host an open invite professional development event on Zoom. In addition to giving back and helping professionals navigate their career, I also cherish these sessions as a way of honing my coaching, public speaking, and writing skills. This ultimately equips me to most effectively help others reach their full potential and prepares me to accomplish this mission at scale. If interested in learning more about the Open Invite professional development events and to see a list of the upcoming sessions, please visit my personal website or scan the QR code on the left. If the upcoming event topics do not include your greatest areas of interest, please let me know what topics you would like to see covered, as I welcome suggestions. Feel free to reach me via a message on LinkedIn or by scanning the QR code on the right. Thank you again for tuning in for this discussion. Without further ado, I am excited to dive into today's conversation on building influence within your personal and professional life. We'll begin just with an initial conversation with Darnell, and then after that, we'll open the floor to any questions. So maybe just to set the stage, as mentioned, we'll kick it off with some opening remarks, or we'll address some of the pre-submitted questions, and then we'll open the floor for questions. Please remain on mute. Makes it easier to hear Darnell and speakers. And please actively raise your hand, the virtual Zoom hand, or if you're comfortable turning on your video when you pose the question. It's always nice to be able to see people and interact that way also. So with that, just a very few quick highlights on or in terms of what we'll cover today. We'll touch on the importance of this topic in our lives and in accomplishing our goals. We'll talk about developing the foundation for this and the role that things like having a strong resume, an updated LinkedIn, being active on social media, what role they can actually play in this topic of building influence in your personal and professional life. And we'll talk about good character and values and the importance of that as you're establishing your brand and really throughout your life and career. And then finally, the role of being your authentic self and the role that that plays in this journey towards building influence. And of course, this conversation will feature Darnell and just a little bit about Darnell. He leads people strategy for a portion of $1 billion Fortune 500 company. He's currently pursuing his doctorate in organizational leadership. On top of that, he's developed teams spanning multiple sectors in the industry. And when I think about Darnell's background, I think everything from how he's thought about this topic in an academic sense, how he's explored it in a work sense with the people strategy related work, and then also being a military vet and also being a father. I just think that he's thought of this forum of influence in many different ways. So I'm really excited with the conversation we're about to have. And Darnell, I'll open it up to you to do a more full introduction of yourself and some of the experiences that you've had that have really informed your thinking around this topic.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Tristan. And thank you for asking me to join and appreciate everyone else joining the call. So just like Tristan said, my name's Darnell Billups. Currently, I oversee people strategy for a $1 billion portion of a company called NVR. So we're a home building company that builds homes under the names Ryan Homes and NV Homes. So basically what I do every day is really my mission. My mission is to help leaders get more out of themselves and their people. So that's what drives me, and that's kind of the link between all the jobs I've had in my career and where I'm at right now. So our focus is on how we hire, train, and engage about 2,000 people in our workforce. So I've been doing it for about 2 years. Before that, I worked in the Department of Education for the state of Tennessee. So I was overseeing the major technology implementations across the state for about 1 million students, 80,000 teachers and staff. And when you think about influence, you look at the education system in America from a state level down to 100 different districts that we had. So influence is very important to try to get technology into individuals' hands, which really played well when it came to the pandemic when we went all virtual. So I was working on that previously before it happened. So it really worked out for the state. Then before that, I spent 8 years in the Marine Corps as a communications officer. So there I deployed overseas, got a lot of responsibilities when it came to that. But then towards the latter end of that 8 years, I oversaw training for about 2,000 Marines in the largest technical occupational school for the Marine Corps. So really a lot into education, strategy, and kind of what's led me kind of to this point in this conversation.
Thank you. And I guess could you speak about as you were navigating all of these different experiences, how was your view of influence evolving? Because I imagine that while you were serving, your view of influence probably different in some ways and in some ways similar. So could you walk us through maybe some of the similarities and how you've just thought of influence at each of these different stages?
Yeah, appreciate that question because sometimes folks think because you're in the military and you're an officer that people will undoubtedly listen to you and never have any issues. But it's completely different than being in the civilian sector. I was in education and state government, and then I moved into kind of a publicly traded company. So influence is different in each of those areas. So inside the military, what I tried to do was kind of always influence individuals from kind of a longer lens. So when I was working with young students young Marine students, they were 18, 19 years old. Some of them were not into the Marine Corps. They thought they had made a bad decision. Some of them were, this is all they wanted to do. So what I told them is, and how I influenced them is to say, no matter how you got here, we're going to make you a better person, period. So if you don't stay in the Marine Corps for all your career and you decide to go and be something else, a doctor, a lawyer, the things that I'm going to teach you here are going to help you be a better person. So that's how I was able to kind of influence folks in the military. And we were able to reduce a lot of kind of incidences and all those different things that typically happen with very young people in the military by really pushing the influence of kind of what you can get out of it. And I think in government, the biggest influence comes down to how you can help individuals. So the way the education structure is in America is kind of the state systems give money out to all the individual districts. And what we found is that, you can give kind of a carrot or a stick. And a lot of times our organizations at that state level, they use the budget to kind of influence. And what we decided in kind of chief information office, yeah, we can use the budget, but let's actually put products in their hands. Let's put things that their IT staffs can use to help them prevent ransomware attacks. Let's put robotics and kits inside kids' hands, and let's use the bargaining power of kind of a state to drive down prices. So we found that was a better way of really pushing influences. It's giving them something that they really wanted and they really needed. And you want people kind of breaking down your door, and that increased our influence in kind of a state system. And now kind of in a role I'm in right now, I think the biggest thing I look at as influence is really relationships. Obviously they're important in everything you do, but I think in kind of the corporate world, kind of your relationships, your image, how you present yourself. I didn't have a LinkedIn account in the military, so it wasn't something, a lot of people have. Now I have it. I'm always on there reaching out to people because there's so much change that happens in kind of the corporate world versus state government and federal government, that you really have to have that network and you have to have that information for you to be able to kind of really influence change.
And maybe just to take the topic of influence and aim to make it a little bit more, maybe let's make it concrete with an example. So if you can think about in the corporate setting and as a manager, or can also be as the experience of being managed, curious if you could maybe speak about where you think influence has played a role. And you spoke about image and the way that you present yourself. Curious to know, uh, how do you feel as though your image is portrayed in the workplace? And then is that consistent with what you want, or how does that evolve over time?
That's a good question. So one of the things I'm working with one of my team members on is kind of his influence, and we've literally sat down and we talked about this topic because he's in a newer role and he's trying to increase that. So one thing we talked about is kind of simple things. When we have Zoom calls, what does your posture look like? Are you prepared? Do you have good eye contact? Because all those things, because people are constantly assessing if they like you or not, and really influence is based on trust and also kind of if people like you or not. So all those things kind of really play into it. So when I look at my influence and does it match my image, I would say it does. So one of the things I really try to push is, I'm always trying to be a helpful person, always trying to give information out kind of where it's needed, and then really having kind of the moral character that I think organizations need and that individuals are looking for from folks. So when it comes to any interaction, I think it has to be authentic. It has to be kind of grounded in kind of your moral principles and who you are. Because Tristan, we've talked about kind of influence and being authentic. And you really have to kind of present yourself kind of really the same way as much as you can all the time, because people kind of can sense if you're being fake or if it's not real.
And how is that trust conveyed virtually? Like we spoke about LinkedIn, and you mentioned that now this is something that you're actively on. When you're reaching out to somebody on LinkedIn, as an example, especially if it's somebody that's not in your network and maybe you don't have mutual connections that know you very well and so forth, how do you feel like that trust in terms of a personal brand can be conveyed once you move towards a digital space where you're not interacting with the person physically?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it really comes down to kind of all the stuff you do before you actually reach out to someone. So if it's simple things like your headshot, that's something I went and kind of invested some money. I do see it as an investment because it helps you kind of when you're interacting with folks. So having a professional picture, you don't necessarily have to pay for it, but at least make it a professional picture. And then also it comes down to your track record. So what do you have inside of that LinkedIn profile that will really grab people and kind of tell a story? So my advice always to people is, use all of your LinkedIn profile. Don't just put kind of your name and title and that's it, and the dates you worked at the job. Really dig down and kind of get some key bullet points that you've had in each job that you've held and what you did to help the bottom line, to help others. Put things you're volunteering in there, because that will show people kind of, it'll give a more human stance to you. And it's not just when you reach out to someone, they're going to look at your profile, obviously. So they want to know kind of who you are and kind of what you are, but even before they contact you. And I think the last thing is, don't be afraid to reach out, even if it's somebody who's not necessarily in your network. I know I got introduced to Triston, a friend of a friend kind of introduced me to Triston. And I know anyone who has reached out to me and had a kind of a genuine interest in anything I was doing, either at my workplace or in other areas of my life, I've 100% of the times was able to make time for that individual and talk to them. So just really be confident and reach out to folks who you're interested in.
Yeah, I would absolutely echo that. And in my experience, the way that I've definitely thought about it is if you reach out to somebody, I think there's a lot of potential that you could have a great conversation or it could really open some meaningful doors. And the worst case scenario is they don't respond. And so that's perfectly fine. Also, there's enough people out there that if you're looking for information or you're looking for opportunities, it's usually not just one person who holds the key to everything that you need. It's a collection of people. And so my mentality has really been to be very proactive, reach out to as many people as possible. And I've seen in my experience that people respond in some pretty major ways. And I remember that initially as a college student, I would sometimes be surprised with the extent to which other people would step up and lend support. But at this point, it no longer surprises me just because of how many examples I've seen of that. And it's really echoing, I think, what you're sharing. Um,
And I'll add
so
one point, Triston.
yeah,
Now with COVID, I think more senior leaders are more comfortable with video chats and things like that. So I think that's definitely an opportunity to expand your network, even if you're in different countries or in different states. Where I think before maybe you were just looking for individuals who may be in your local area.
yeah, absolutely. I think that's it's one of the ways in which it's one of the ways in which COVID has actually made relationship building and maybe outreach more so than relationship building, because those can be two different things, but has actually helped facilitate an easier environment for that. Because I found the same thing in terms of the ability to hop on the phone with people that might have been more difficult to get in front of in the past. I've seen some more doors open up in a positive way. Um, so it'd be great if you could speak. So we've talked a lot about values and characters and the importance of establishing these things, and especially as it relates to values and thinking about what you actually want your values to be. Do you want to be somebody that is known as being connected 24/7, so super responsive, or do you want to be somebody that is, not known for being plugged in all the time so that you can maintain your value of work-life balance or time with family and so forth? So I'd love to hear, especially as as a leader and as a father, I'd love to hear how you think about values in your own life and what you want those to be, and then how you actually convey those values to the people that are around you, because they, of course, need to be able to understand them in order to interact and respect them appropriately and so forth.
Yeah, so I think what a lot of what that question entails is kind of what your mission is. And I know a lot of times when I talk to folks, they get confused, or if that comes up, they just don't know what to say. It's like, I don't have a mission, or I don't know what it is. But really what a mission is kind of what drives you, but then also what makes you happy and energized. I know when I leave work and I've helped a leader be a better leader, or I helped an employee figure out how to solve a problem, that energizes me and I feel happy about that. So I think a lot of when we talk about kind of this influence topic, and then how we kind of outwardly give it out is like, what's your mission, and kind of can you clearly talk about it, and do you kind of know what gives you energy, and kind of what makes you happy, and kind of talking about kind of values and how you talk about it. Your values really come from your family. It comes from the organizations you've grown up in. I know a lot of times values can come from your religion. I know for me personally, a lot of my values come from my mother. She was a very hard worker, worked double shifts every day for years to make sure that I could go to college. She had never graduated high school, didn't go to college, and so for me to be the first person in my family to go to college and then go to the Naval Academy, above all those things, was huge. But I think an important note, and a story I've only shared a few times, is I was actually in the podiatrist's office, because when you go to the service academy, you have to go through a full physical, and they had denied me the first time because of my flat feet. So I had to go visit a specialist, and there was two chairs in the podiatrist's office. And one chair, I said to myself, that's going to be for the doctor. And I gave the other chair to my mom. So this is when the doctor was out of the office. So I came in, he checked my feet, and he basically told me, he said, Darnell, I've been doing this a long time. And teenagers like yourself, I was 17 at the time. He said, there's always been two chairs in here. And typically when I come into the office, the kid is sitting in the chair and the parent is standing up. And so he said, you know what? I typically would have failed you, but he said, I'm going to pass you because you have the character and the values that I think should be in our military officer corps. So that's literally the only reason I was able to get into the Naval Academy and kind of do all the things I talked to you guys about earlier. But really, that was values, and I've always tried to kind of respect for persons, respect for authority, being able to bring people together. So those types of things really drive me and are open in what I'm about.
Thank you. I want to be, and this resonates with me as well as a first generation college student. And I think that the humility that you're describing, and just it's very clear that your values in this case and the characters, I do think that the experiences that we have early on in our lives really shape those. So appreciate you sharing that. I want to make sure that we're leaving plenty of time for people that have questions on the line. So maybe I'll just, one final question, which is going to be super open-ended, but is there anything that you had on your mind connected to these topics that we haven't yet covered, that you think is a really important message for people who are trying to grapple with this idea of how to really go about building influence, and why it's so important to spend the time and energy towards actually thinking about this? So I'd love to get your kind of thoughts on that, and then afterwards we'll turn it over to people and the questions that have been submitted.
Yeah, thanks, Tristan. So really is a couple things. So really when you look at influence, I think the easiest way to look at it is kind of, there's the outward part of influence. So it's kind of your track record, your resume, your LinkedIn profile, kind of the people you know and the information you have. But then there's also the inward part. So to me, that's where the real work happens. It's the inward part of influence. It's kind of your character and how you sit on a moral high ground in certain situations, because those things are really, it's what's going to make you adaptable and kind of make you able to make quick changes in your organization or inside of your life. I had a teacher in high school, one thing he talked about character, he said, don't lie, cheat, or steal. And that was just something that's always kind of resonated with me and classmates that I grew up with and had him. So it's ultimately, can you be trusted with confidential information? Do you talk about people behind your back or when they're not in the room? Kind of all those things kind of build into your character. And then, like we were talking about with Triston earlier, is it exactly who you are in all situations? And then kind of the last piece in that inward part is navigation. So your character and your morals is really going to help you have the judgment you need to then make the decisions that are required to build your influence. Because there are going to be micro decisions that you're going to have to make when you're dealing with your boss, you're dealing with customers, you're dealing with your team members. And if you really don't have kind of that grounding, you're really going to miss that judgment and decision making piece. And obviously, it's not something you're always going to know day one. Like you really have to kind of grow with it and continue with your character building. Like it's not something you just check off and say, hey, I have the character required to be, a senior leader. Like it doesn't happen that way. You got to build it.
Great, thank you. And I'll go ahead and turn it over now to the audience to be able to pose questions live. And Durga, I'd love for you to be able to pose the first question. Darnell, I think you'll have a really good perspective on this in terms of the time in the military where you're leading people who are older than you. But Durga, let me turn the floor over to you to pose the question live.
Okay, thank you, Tristan. Hi, Danelle. Thank you for your sharing. It was really informative and insightful. My question was, how do you build influence as you start your professional journey? So when you're starting off, you might have to, you're surrounded with people who are more experienced and older. So my question is, how do you start establishing and then building influence? Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Durga. What it really comes down to, what I found is ask questions, be the most kind of inquisitive person you can possibly be. So in the military, you're typically about 22 years old when you have your first group of Marines, and that's about 40 people. And you typically have a senior person that maybe 15 or 20 years experience, who's kind of your second person responsible. And the biggest thing is just ask questions and don't necessarily cede any type of authority if like you're in a leadership position, because it is your final decision, but ask questions, include the person in any decisions you make. When I moved into the Department of Education, I took over teams of engineers and computer software programmers and things like that, and product managers. And again, I knew nothing about any of this stuff. But I just dug in and I read every book I could get my hands on. There's actually a consultant from Microsoft, because we had kind of a partnership with them. And he was just excellent. And I just talked to him all day, every day to kind of pick his brain about different things. So eventually I had a meeting with one of the teams on one of the products we were working on. And one of the engineers looked up at me and she's like, how do you know all this? Like, you don't have an engineering background, you don't have kind of a software background. And I was just like, well, I just learned. And that's, so I think when you have situations like that, where you may not be the most senior person in your organization, or you're leading, you're in a situation where you're leading more senior people who have more tenure than you, ask questions and learn as fast as possible and as much as possible.
Thank you. Thank you. Maybe just another question. Just now we were talking about values, right? So how do you know your values, but how do you communicate your values to others so that they know that these are your values, this is your brand? Other than maybe like LinkedIn, is there any other way?
Yeah, I've always looked at it as being upfront with people. Typically, if I'm taking over an organization, I will share my values. You know, a lot of it comes through we would call it leadership story. So kind of, if you go on Triston's website, he kind of has a layout of all the different things that he's done in his life and kind of parts of his story. So typically what I've done in my interactions to kind of share my values, it doesn't necessarily have to be kind of, here's my value one, here's value two. Like it can be that way. It's nothing wrong with that. But I always like to share stories with people. It's just because stories resonate with humans a lot more. We've been doing it since the dawn of time, like, sitting around fire and telling stories. So I typically share my leadership story, kind of my background from Philadelphia, my influence from my mother, and how I got into the Naval Academy, and then kind of what has led me to this point. So it just comes off again as more authentic when you're able to share stories and give a little bit about yourself. I think that's always a better way to share your values.
Thank you.
Thank you
And
so
also
much,
it
Durga,
helps,
for. Oh,
I was gonna say,
oh, go ahead.
also it helps as a leader just to know your leadership story. Like you got to know that.
Yeah, I would definitely echo that point in terms of really knowing what your leadership story is. And I found that one of the things that has been most helpful has been gaining that personal clarity. And everybody gains it through different ways. I've personally gained it through therapy sessions, which I've gone to on a weekly basis for roughly a decade. And I feel like that really forces you to grapple with some of the most challenging moments in your life and to actually communicate and talk them through. So I think that like therapy is something that unfortunately has a negative stigma, but I feel like it's been one of the biggest things in terms of understanding my own journey. And then coaching as well. So both being coached and coaching other people. So I think mentorship is a great way to understand your leadership journey, your values, and so forth, because when you're doing things similar to Darnell hosting a conversation like this and being asked all of these questions, it actually forces him to actually think and develop his answers. And over time, that can really be a reflection of what you see as your strengths, your perspectives, and so forth. So I think that mentoring others can be a great way to do it as well. But thank you, Durga, for the question around there in terms of managing people at various levels and people who may be more seasoned and so forth in their career journey. Um, Jessica, I'll turn it over to you because I think that your question around getting started is very practical. So Jessica, if you're on the line, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Tristan. Thank you, Darnell, for sharing your experiences. So I had a question about any tips or suggestions you might have on actionable items to get started with building for influence. I guess just little things that we can do to kind of get our feet wet and then build on from there.
Hey, Jessica, thanks for the question. Tristan mentioned coaching. I think that's really important. There's always, I feel as though you should invest a little bit of money to help kind of build your influence. So we talked about resume. I've had folks help me pattern my resume to make sure it is saying what I wanted to say. You don't have to, but I think when you look at your resume as kind of the entry point, I think it's really important to have that. So the other thing is your LinkedIn profile. You can also get a lot of help from professionals on your LinkedIn profile. Again, your picture says a lot about you in your LinkedIn profile. So those are kind of the little steps I think that you can have, because if you reach out to someone and you have a great conversation with them, and maybe 2 weeks later they say, hey, we had a great conversation, I think you'll be a great fit for this role, can you send me your resume? And then you're like, oh, well, I don't, so you always got to kind of have it ready and be able to do it, because just imagine if they say that, you say, hey, I already have my resume updated, here you go. Now you're building your influence, and it's kind of those small things that really go a long way.
Yeah, and to build on that, I would say that influence is something that you can kind of build and grow over time. So think about it, at least when I started, I thought about it more actually through the lens of impact than I did through influence, but I do think that the two go hand in hand. And I think that when I'm talking to, especially when I'm talking to current students, I feel as though sometimes there's this unfortunate reality where students will assume that they don't have anything to contribute because they're younger. And I think this is starting to change, and I'm actually glad that this is starting to change a little bit. where you're starting to see more and more people not feeling as though their age is an obstacle in terms of them having an impact. But the way I'd say it, like everybody who's a college student, there's a world of high school students out there that have never been to college before and could really benefit from hearing somebody just talk about, look, these were the things that were, scary as it related to, first, transitioning for university. These were some of the fears that I had. This is how college actually played out. These were the resources that I used. So there's a whole world of high school students out there that you can help. People who just started their job. There's a whole world of college students out there that have never kind of had a full-time job, that are wondering how it's different from being in school. So I think that part of the way that you can start to build the influence is just thinking about, who are a few people that I can have a positive impact on, and then try to have that positive impact. You'll learn from that experience, and then from there you can think about how you scale that. Okay, if I'm going to now be able to reach more people, maybe it's a matter of talking to 2 or 3 people, figuring out how you can have a positive impact on them, asking them like, look, would it be beneficial to turn this into a group conversation? If so, like, do you know some peers that would want to join the conversation as well? Which is basically how how the speaker series currently started. Just by having these conversations, people would find them helpful. I'd invite them to other sessions and so forth. So I'd say in this idea of where to start, start with anything. As a base, and it's okay to start small, and just think about it in the lens of how do you have a positive impact. And if you're having a positive impact, I think your influence will naturally grow from.
Yeah, and I would add
Awesome.
really quickly, there's a bit of kind of risk taking when you're trying to build influence, and kind of like you're talking about, Jessica, where are things you can start. I was researching kind of influence and some other things before the call, and I didn't know this, but AWS, Amazon Web Services, which is like a multi-billion-dollar part of Amazon now, it was started by kind of a regular employee who pitched the idea to Jeff Bezos, and it became Amazon Web Services, which is a huge. So I figured, like, kind of through that if I have an idea, why not reach out to certain people in the C-suite and kind of give them ideas. Kind of going back to Tristan's point of, there's always something you can share, and I think that thing you can share that makes you unique or makes you different is really what helps folks. Kind of, and helps you increase your influence, because influence is not, it doesn't help. Influence helps you by helping the organization. So your organizations want you to be influential, because that will then help them too.
Absolutely. and
Awesome.
and yeah, and
Thank you so much for your tips.
yeah, thank you, Jessica, for the question. Leslie, I'll turn it over to you, because I think we've been speaking a lot about this through a professional lens. So I think your question will be interesting in terms of helping us to also think through it through a personal lens. So I'll turn it over to you, Leslie.
Thank you, Tristan. Thank you, Darnell. My question was really, it's that we mentioned a bit talking about our values, like what do we want to be known for and what's important to us. But is there, Darnell, do you have maybe like some way of thinking about it, maybe a framework for us to really assess how to really measure we're being effective, not only in our professional setting, but also personally?
Yeah, Leslie, thank you for the question. So I did have some kind of resources that I wanted to share with you guys, but one of them is a kind of it's a personality assessment. It's called the SDI. It's the Strength Development Inventory. The coach I work with, she introduced it to me, and it really, Myers-Briggs, and there's a lot of other personality assessments that you can take. But what I like about SDI is it kind of looks at kind of the question you were talking about, Leslie, like kind of what are your values? What are possibly driving you? What inspires you? What kind of gets you in a negative space too? And I think it's also helped me kind of clarify where my leadership story fits into some parts of that assessment, and then where your values lie too. So there's a lot of personality assessments out there. So that may be kind of one piece, Leslie, you can use and everyone else can use to kind of help clarify where they are. Because a lot of times you'll see those assessments and you'll say, that's me. and it'll kind of help you clarify those things for you.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Leslie. And Manura, I'll turn it over to you to pose your question around authentic self.
Sure. Thanks, Triston, and thanks, Darnell and Triston, for all the insights that you've been sharing so far. I think my question is mainly about influence in a group, because group dynamics also sort of also plays a part in how you influence people. And as as a person, you'll be moving from different environments. So I was just wondering, when different environments have different sort of values, they sort of conform to certain values, they may be different from who you are. To what level do you retain your authenticity, or to what level do you sort of conform to that group, the group values that they have? I'm just curious to know.
I think that's a great question. So like I said, I was in federal government, in the military, the Marine Corps, which is like, very like aggressive. And then I went into education, which again is not like the Marine Corps, is completely different. But then I was in the technology office within the education system, which is very different. And then I'm kind of in a publicly traded company now. So I've kind of had this almost headache at this point, trying to navigate different groups and group dynamics and figure things out. I remember the first probably couple months I was at Department of Education, there was a person who didn't come into work because they were kind of stressed because there was like some incident that happened with a product or something like that. And that blew my mind that someone didn't come to work, because in the Marine Corps, that's just not something you do. Like if you physically, you have to be there. And so to your question, Manora, like how do you deal with these different kind of environments? I think the first part is know what you're getting into. I think looking back on it, I wanted to go into education, and I did as much research about the organizations as possible, talked to as many people as I could. So whenever you transition groups within a company or outside of a company, make sure you reach out to folks and kind of get an aspect of what their culture is like and what they're doing. Because some people, they like to go for beers and wings on Fridays. Some groups, everyone is out the door at 4 p.m. And that might be a lot different than what you're used to. So I would say kind of early on, at least get as much information as possible and kind of have those value culture conversations with people. That way, at least you can make a decision about if that fits you. And then also, if it does fit you, or is kind of either or, you kind of can deal with it. At least going in kind of where people sit and where people are.
Got it. Thank you, Darnell. And just to add on one more question, because you talked about values conversations, right? So, there'll be some people in your team where, you sort of have this mission that you're sort of developing towards your authentic self, but there may be people who may not be aware that, they may be portraying someone who may not be authentic to them, and you can sort of feel that. I'm not sure whether you've had the experience where someone is not being their authentic self. So how do you have that values conversation with them so that you can sort of, bring them forward? Because at the end of the day, the values for the team, right? When you're all being your authentic self. So how do you have that conversation with someone who may not have had that prior experience or conversation of learning to be authentic?
Yeah, I think a lot of that has to do with your example. So one thing I have 2 kids, and the biggest thing I've learned as a parent is it's all about your example. So and if anyone has kids will say whatever they want, especially the strangers. So I remember my kids were kind of riding their bikes and they were stopping, they talked to a neighbor. And so I walk over there, and my daughter was telling the neighbor how her dad was in a doctorate program and he was going to be a doctor. And so the thing is, my kid could have said anything about me, but I already know I present myself in a certain way, and that's going to influence them kind of in the end. So I think that would be my advice in that situation, is kind of be the best example you can be, and maybe find ways of just kind of nudging the person or just having conversations about it and being your authentic self. Because if you'll radiate, like people will notice. It may not be immediate, but people will notice your values, you're being authentic, and they will want to kind of gravitate towards you.
All right. Thank you so much, Darnell.
Awesome. Thank you. Carla, I'll turn it over to you for the next question, connected to authentic self as well.
Thank you, Tristan. Hi, Darnell. My question tonight is really about how do you remain that authentic self as you move up, especially as a young professional? How do you, when you're working with others or with you're meeting new teams or even new companies, how do you stay true to that? And then secondly, I also wanted to know, what books are you reading or what speakers are you listening to?
Thanks for the question. I think the biggest thing I've learned is just be humorous with yourself. Just kind of don't take yourself too seriously. What I've seen is, as I've gotten more responsibility, or my span of responsibilities have grown, just being able to laugh on the way home about a mistake you made or a situation you've had, I think that really kind of has started to help me just see everything kind of in a more long-term light. I think a lot of folks, you're trying to drive, you're trying to change things, you're trying to be a change maker, and that can be tiring. So I think kind of there's some rejuvenation in just being able to laugh at yourself. I know my senior leader, our vice president, he just retired. He was always laughing. And he told us, he said, I have great work-life balance. If you work for me and you don't have great work-life balance, that is your fault. So again, he was just a funny guy. And I always look back on how did he get to that point in his life? And I think part of it is he just has kind of a simple way of just like laughing at himself and laughing at situations. So that would be kind of my advice on that as you kind of move up, just kind of continue to laugh. And then the other thing you asked, like, what am I reading? So a lot of academic research and things like that for my doctorate program. But I actually, on my way to work now, I'm back home, I've been listening to a book about Stoicism. So we talked about character and being on a moral high ground. I think there's a lot of information and different philosophies that are out there. And I've kind of just gravitated towards Stoicism. And there's a lot of misconceptions about it. And it's just been fascinating to kind of read more into that and listen to it.
Thanks so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Carla, for the question, and thank you, Darnell. Billy, I know you had a question regarding navigating conflict in this journey towards building confidence. I'll turn it over to you, Billy, to pose the question.
Hi, I am Billy from Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. Currently, I am an engineer who works in the oil and gas upstream operation. And in my current workplace, I feel that it's actually hard for me to navigate conflicts. Like, I was wondering, could you share some useful information like how to navigate the conflicts in the workplace, especially like if I put my authentic self out there, like, and also I just feel like this is just very tough situations to handle.
Yeah. No, I appreciate the question, Billy. And so I think it relates to some other resources I wanted to share with the group. So there's a book called Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion. I would definitely pick that up. I think it's a really great read. It's on Audible, all those things. It just goes into psychology about why people do things. And I think that's always important for a leader to understand that, especially when you're trying to deal with conflict. Another book I recommend that will kind of help you, Billy, is How to Win Friends and Influence People. I think that's a kind of a standard book. If you guys haven't picked that up, I think it's a great resource. Then the other thing is HBR, so the Harvard Business Review. If you don't have an account to kind of unlock all that knowledge that's in there, I would definitely spend the money to get that. There's so many articles in there by like great, intelligent people who kind of can deal with things like leadership, influence, navigating organizations, conflict management. So those would be resources I would kind of reach out and kind of have those, Billy, for yourself. But the way I approach conflict and the way I teach people to approach conflict is to stay curious. So a lot of times when we're in conflict, it's because there's not enough information that we're sharing. So, you know, it's almost like an iceberg where kind of the real issues are below the surface. So if you stay curious and kind of continue to ask questions like, well, why is this? Or, you know, what did you mean by that? Because a lot of times our brain just jumps to a conclusion, especially me. I'm the biggest person that will jump to a conclusion because I'll always think it's because, you know, oh, that person's just rude, or, well, no, it's probably because, like, you know, they didn't get enough sleep last night, or, you know, you were actually rude and you didn't notice it. So I would say, Billy, just stay curious and just continue to ask questions of that person or that group. You're right. Yep, Billy.
Awesome. Thank you, Billy, for the question. And maybe there's one question that was submitted by the chat directly, so I'll go ahead and just pose that, Darnell. But the question is around, how does building influence differ as an introverted leader versus as an extroverted leader, given the assumptions around influence and assertiveness, as an example, that confidence is is needed, or demonstration of confidence goes hand in hand with influence, is would be an assumption that many people would have. So do you have any nuances for how we've discussed influence in the context of introversion versus extroversion, and how that may factor in?
That's a great question. I think it's this idea of charisma, that, you know, you need charisma, you need everyone to kind of love you when you walk into a room, to be an effective leader. Maybe for politicians or, you know, movie stars, but for, like, you know, business leaders, community leaders, parents, like, you know, you don't necessarily need to have kind of this magnetism. Really, it comes back to what we talked about. You know, what are your values? What are your characters, traits? Kind of what's your track record? What are the things you've been successful? Because that's what really kind of gets people on your side. I'm an introvert by nature. I'm a true introvert. That's where I get my energy from, just being by myself. So even coming on here is kind of, all right, I got to work myself up to kind of make sure I can, you know, give you guys what you need. But I think a lot of times you probably wouldn't see that, because I will interact with employees. I'll go out on site tours. I will interact because it's my value. It's my mission. My mission is to help leaders and people and employees. So if you look at it from what's driving you far as a mission standpoint, you're always going to go out of your way to do that thing. So if it's like getting on this call, even if it makes me nervous, I'm going to do it because it is part of my mission. It's part of what drives me. It's what makes me ultimately happy. So I think you always got to just go there. Don't necessarily worry about having charisma. Just worry about being a good dude. Like, that's what we always say in the Marine Corps. You know, obviously there's men and women on the call, but that's what we would say. You know, just be a good person, and a lot of the stuff, the influence will follow.
I appreciate that as well, especially as somebody who, myself, am definitely introverted as well. And so I think that resonates. And, you know, sometimes it's almost odd, because I love public speaking, even though I am introverted, because it does force me out of my comfort zone. So I grow with time and it becomes easier with time. And then the other thing, for me is I feel like, as an introvert, it's sometimes the difficult part can be either opening up or beginning the conversation. But when you're moderating a discussion or leading a discussion, other people are going to, you know, proactively pose the questions to you, which, you know, takes away the effort of needing to do that proactively in some ways. So really, really resonates. And I would agree with you that I think that it doesn't need to be, you know, one book that I think actually talks about this very nicely would be Susan Cain's book, Quiet, which is all about how people can, how introverts can really thrive in environments that are oftentimes feel as though they are most well suited for extroverts, the business world being one of the examples that's talked heavily about in the book. With that, Angela, I'll turn it over to you for your question around imposter syndrome.
Yeah, that sounds great. Hi, Darnell and Tristan. Thanks so much for hosting this. I feel like this has been really helpful information. But I had a question on how do you really fight imposter syndrome? As a student right now, I feel like it's really relevant to my life right now. So I would really like to know about your thoughts on this.
No, I appreciate the question. That's a huge thing. That's something I've dealt with, honestly, in every role I've had. I've kind of had to go through that. But I will say, I wouldn't say you get over it, but once you kind of can box that syndrome in, I think that's when you just soar. And so I would just kind of give you at least that advice. Like, if it's something you can get past, then, there's a lot more kind of you can get out of your college experience and then kind of your career experience. I think when I've been in those situations, what I've found is that having mentors that may or may not look like you or come from your background is really helpful, because I think the right mentors kind of pour into you, and because my mom, she's always going to say, Darnell, you're the best thing ever. You're this, but really it's your mom. So you gotta, but like when a mentor says it and they're just like, Darnell, like, look what you've done. Like, you can really push this organization, and like you're also coaching, like my coach, kind of the same thing, kind of these cheerleaders in your corner that have a little bit more distance from you. I think that's where you kind of can box in this imposter syndrome and say, you know what, I can do it. There's no difference between me and this other person, and I actually can do it. And you kind of can step out and take a lot more risks. So that's where I found kind of being able to do imposter syndrome is mentorship and coaching. It always helps to have your mom say those things, I'm not gonna lie, but definitely mentors and coaches help.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much. I definitely agree with you on the mentorship part. And I really enjoyed hearing that.
Awesome. Well, mindful of time, we probably have time for one additional question. All of the questions that were submitted to me, both in the chat and ahead of time, have been addressed. So I guess I'll just open the floor for if anybody has any other question at this point that we haven't covered, feel free to just unmute your line and pose the question live.
Darnell, I just have one question. I'm interested in learning about your rituals. Like, what are your maybe daily habits or things that you have to do in order to stay on top of your game?
That's a great question. So I actually just moved into a new house and I got a puppy. So my life is just like in shambles now, and I'm trying to kind of get it back together on my schedule. But basically what I do now is kind of wake up with the dog and all those things. But ultimately what I do is I like to get into the office. The first 30 minutes really is about stuff that I need to do. And I picked this tip up from Triston. So I journal every day. So I kind of write a paragraph, not even if it's one sentence, I at least try to get something down in my journal every morning. And this is a comment Triston, I picked up from Triston's one of his videos. Write kind of the number one thing you want to get done that day, and then just start on that. And so that's what I've done recently, and it's really helpful. The other thing is I focus on work when I'm at work. I don't go into my email 100 times. Like, I actually track if I go into my email and touch my phone so I can see on my board. It just keeps me focused and in the mindset of work when I'm working. So that way, when I'm not at work, I'm not thinking about work or doing work because I got it all done earlier in the day. So those are two big things. My calendar, everything goes in my calendar. If I have something for my kids, I have something for work, travel. This is something I picked up in my last program I was in. everything goes. So if I go for a business trip, I put on my calendar the flight time, my code for the Hertz rental car, like everything is in there. So you're not just like spending time going through papers and wasting your time kind of in the airport. So the calendar is really important. And then if you have a team, train your team. I think this is a lot of what leaders miss. They get mad at their folks because they don't do something right, but they don't spend the time to actually teach them what they're supposed to be doing, which then makes your life easier. So that's one thing I really focus on. I meet with my team every morning. We go over kind of the plan of the day. And if I see they're not doing something right or they need a little bit more coaching, I just do it immediately. And it just pays dividends because it just gives you more time to think. And that's why kind of you're being paid, is to think about business problems and how to solve them. And you need to be building your influence. So you need time to do that. So.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Carla, and thank you. I think that's a very practical note to maybe wrap up on. So really appreciate it, Darnell. Maybe in the final few minutes, I'll just turn it back to you, Darnell, in terms of any closing thoughts, or as we've gone through this whole conversation, if there are 2 or 3 things that you really want people to walk away remembering from the conversation connected to this topic, what would you say those topics are for you?
So Triston, thanks for inviting me. This was really fun. I appreciate kind of all the questions, and it's just great to kind of pour into others and kind of give my perspective and hear everyone else's perspective. I think the biggest takeaway is just kind of, as you're building your influence, just understand it's not just about kind of you in a sense. It's a good thing to build your influence because it helps the organization, it helps your team, it helps kind of the world and everything else. So building influence is actually a good thing. You should be doing it. And just kind of remember, be a team player, be a good dude, be a good gal, and kind of all the other stuff will definitely follow.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Darnell. I really appreciate you carving out an hour of your evening in order to be able to kind of chat with us about this. So thank you. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in for the conversation. I host similar events every few weeks. So if there are topics that you're interested in covering, please do feel free to reach out to me, pose suggestions for topics and so forth. The idea is really to create a forum here so that people have an outlet to be able to tune in and pose the questions that they have and get perspectives from people who have spent a lot of time thinking about these subjects, similar to Darnell in today's case. So again, thank you, Darnell, and take care, everybody.
Appreciate it, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.